Well, let's bring in John Horowitz. He's a professor emeritus of cardiology at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Professor, I imagine losing a spouse at any time must be incredibly stressful, but after many years, even decades together, especially in the case of, say, the Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, who were together for 73 years, I imagine it's especially difficult. Talk to us about what this syndrome entails.
Takotsubo syndrome, or broken heart syndrome, was first described by the Japanese about 30 years ago, and it's a condition which occurs mainly in aging women. They're typically women over the age of 50. About 90% of cases are such people, and it's induced really by anything that brings a sudden spurt of adrenaline into the bloodstream. So any sort of emotional or physical trauma can do it, but of course one such trauma is the trauma of bereavement, which has led to its being labelled broken heart syndrome, because there have been several high-profile cases of bereavement followed by the onset of the syndrome. The syndrome actually mimics a heart attack, except that there is no clot in the coronary arteries, and it's really an inflammation, first of the blood vessels and later of the heart. The risk of death is about the same as with a conventional heart attack, but until relatively recently, we've had no good explanation for it.
You know, I'm surprised to hear that it mostly affects women. Do you know why that is?
No, we don't really. It may well be that the aging of the heart and of the blood vessels is different from women to men. We don't think this is specifically related to menopause. In fact, we think the older the woman, the greater the risk. And it may well be that what actually happens is that there's initial damage to the blood vessels, which causes them to become leaky, and the patient usually develops quite low blood pressure initially. So it often is not only an apparent heart attack, but apparent shock initially. And then the patient gets better, and for a while people think that everything is okay. But there is actually a very slow recovery, and there is a risk of recurrence. So overall, the chance of dying of this, both in the short term and the long term, is about the same as for an ordinary heart attack.
Talk to us a bit about the correlation between stress, such as the stress of losing a spouse, and the brain.
I think this is not just stress. It is anything that brings a high level of adrenaline. In, for example, a rat, you can inject a rat with adrenaline, and you can cause something precisely the same without any particular stress. In fact, this is done under anaesthetic. If you give an antidepressant agent, which works by increasing the amount of adrenaline in the bloodstream, that will again bring on Takotsubo. We think that patients who have high-risk operations, where again a lot of adrenaline is released, again there is a risk of inducing this condition. So we should be interested both in developing means of preventing it in high-risk circumstances and also better ways of treating it, differentiating it from heart attacks, which are normally caused by clots.
So what can be done to help someone better cope with the death of a long-term partner so that they themselves aren't at risk of dying?
Up to now, we really do not have an answer to that question. We're conducting a trial to reduce the risk of dying once the condition begins. And we also think that people who are involved in really high-risk circumstances, like, for example, in natural disasters, in bushfires in Australia, for example, may be at particular risk, and they may be best served by the use of drugs which reduce the inflammatory effects of adrenaline within the bloodstream, and that's what we're investigating at the moment.
All right, Professor John Horowitz, thank you so much for your time.